I would say the current business model for, and if I talk about we, I mean the pharmaceutical industry, and particularly also sometimes Janssen when I speak about the company that I represent. But the current business model is broken. Now, in the pharmaceutical industry, and we as Janssen, we have actually models and studies to prove that it is working. The general perception, though, is it doesn't work anymore. We're not getting our breakthrough medicines reimbursed. If we do get them reimbursed, it's with a significant delays running into years. And you know, every country has really problems managing its budget. And the last country standing, the US, if you saw the Senate hearing commission about a week ago, you will see that even there, the land of free pricing is coming to an end. So we have to realize that we might think it still works. If all of the other stakeholders believe it doesn't work anymore, we have to take that perception as reality and really consider that the model just doesn't work anymore. Now, the demand for healthcare has never been bigger. But the entry ticket to be able to play in healthcare is you have to bring value. If you do not bring value to healthcare, you're not longer allowed in the system. That's the reality. And I want to take you back to a graph that Janssen for ourselves introduced about 12 years ago. We came as a pharmaceutical company out of a really tough period, a lot of loss of exclusivity, and our innovation had not been where it had been, where it needed to be. And we had a visionary, or we still have a visionary R&D leader, and he came up with the concept of the value threshold graph. And you look at this graph, you see on the y-axis the level of innovation, and on the x-axis you see time. And the blue line here is the expectation of the market. As time evolves, the market expects more innovation because science evolves, because great medicines come to market, and you have to be better than what we have today in order to be successful in the future. So you start with a new product, and you aim high in your R&D process. You go for multiple indications. And as you progress, you know, you run into some adversities. And eventually, when you get to the market, you have to make sure you get to the market above that blue line, because that line is differentiation. That line presents value because what you bring is higher than what the market expects. Now, that's differentiation. If you are too slow, or if during the process you come into too many problems and you come in the market underneath the blue line, you basically are a Me Too product and you're not longer allowed in the marketplace. There was a time when we could do that, when we had Me Too products. There was a time when our industry was paradise. It's no longer paradise, but I would still think it's little paradise if you do really well. Now, here's the naive part that we had 12 years ago. We thought that if we continue to do studies on the medicines and we would get additional indications, we would be able to continue to charge a higher price. That model has completely eroded. That doesn't work anymore. There's not a single system, not a single payer that will actually pay more if you add new indications to your medicines. So that was the graph of 12 years ago. Now, this looks very complicated, but this is a graph of today. You look at, again, the magnitude of value on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and you start your clinical work, you start your development programs, your trials, and you end up with the green line. The green line is the value evidence that you generate in clinical trials and even also with real-world evidence. And you see that over time, as you continue to invest, that value evidence keeps going up as you collect more data about the great medicines we bring to market. Then we talk about value recognition. This is when you really go into the discussions with HTA bodies like NICE, like IQWiC. They often use different parameters. They do not always accept your endpoints like progression-free survival. And so they already start taking away some of the value that you generate. That is that white dotted line. And then if you pass NICE and IQWiC and HAS and so on, you still have to go into negotiations with the NHS, with the regions in Italy and Spain, and you end up with the red line. And that's really the reality of today. While you keep adding value evidence, the only way for your price is actually to go down. That's the reality. We have to accept it. So that's the model of today. Now, add to that a number of additional complexities. And this was a slide we used last year, and I called it future complexities, but in fact, they are today's complexities. We have now multiple indications for medicines. You have novel combinations, even triplets, not always with your own medicines, but also with competitive medicines like combination therapies. You have a variable treatment duration depending on the patient profile and the profile of the medicine in a specific area that you use it for. And of course, we have data maturity, really now with the data lake connecting all the data that sits at different sources together. So that creates a number of additional challenges. We need increased pricing flexibility. As you have multiple indications, as you have to try the combinations, one price just doesn't do it. So how do you go about that? That's the reality that we're facing today. Another one is the strong patient voice, and I welcome that. But the patient, we used to work for the patients. Now it's much more about how can we work with the patients. The patient is so much more informed about his or her condition and has a much stronger voice through social media as well. So we cannot ignore that patient voice. The patient needs to be an integral part on how we actually develop medicines. And I think that's a great evolution. And then the last part is HTA was developed when oncology medicines would add maybe 2-3 weeks, maybe 2-3 months of life, and then the whole concept of a quality adjusted life here with a price that made sense. But now our oncology medicines become so good that patients can actually stay on them and be doing well for several years. And HTA methodologies do not work for that. So we really need to think about an innovation in HTA for when it comes to oncology medicines. So those are really the changing times that we are faced with today. So you heard in the past few days a lot about technology. There's so much going on when it's about, whether it's about wearables, whether it's about artificial intelligence in R&D, whether it's about robotic surgery, 3D printing. I think the level of change is unprecedented and is really fantastic, and certainly has now also found its way going into healthcare. And so I just want to talk about what, as a pharmaceutical industry and a pharmaceutical company, we are faced with. And I like this word, Eisenbahnscheinbewegung risk. And probably only people in the room that would understand this are the German people in the audience. Now, the Germans are fantastic in putting together what seem to be two unrelated words and make a completely new word that has a different meaning. Germans are great in many things. I mean, really, they make great cars. They have strong economy, at least for a long time. They used to be a good football country as well. And they have this ability as well. Now, what does Eisenbahnscheinbewegung stand for? Eisenbahn is railway. And Scheinbewegung is that trick movement, and you see that often in soccer player, where a player actually gives the impression he's going to one side, but tricks his opponent by actually going to the other side. Now, Eisenbahnscheinbewegung itself is that effect that you're sitting in the train station, you're sitting on the train, and you're looking through the window, and you think, we're actually moving. The train is actually leaving the station. And then you come to realize it's not your train that's moving. It's actually another train that's moving. You're still standing still in the station. And I think that is the risk we face as an industry with the level of change that's going on. If we don't realize that our industry, our healthcare model is about to change, we're going to be the train that's left in the station. And the other train, whether it's going to be the tech companies or who else, is actually going to leave the station and take healthcare to the next level. And why is that risk there? Because the old ways still work. We in Janssen and EMEA closed 2018 with 18% growth. So if I talk about, we cannot be complacent, people often say to me, hey, Kris, what are you talking about? Is 18% growth not enough, maybe? So, and traditional competition is not pushing us to boost. The thing is, the revolution that is coming is largely invisible. I know immediately when our sales reps are not allowed in a Paris hospital to talk about our HIV medication. You know, that message goes immediately to the top. We're not getting access anymore. But when we see changing patterns of how we use technology and digital, we're very slow in seeing that because it's a lot of that is invisible and ongoing under the radar. And I like this phrase about John Kennedy. We used to say the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining, because then you actually have the time, the oxygen, the power, and it's really the right time to do it. Except, you know, when the sun is shining, a lot of people prefer to go to the beach in order to fix the roof. And that's the risk we also take, is going to the beach instead of really rethinking our business model. So that's that famous Eisenbahn-Scheinbewegung risk. Now, I'm a big believer in the theory of the S-curve, that everywhere you're on an S-curve, and at some point when the curve, before it actually starts tapering off, you make the jump to the next curve. That's the success path of the most successful companies. That is on the blue dotted line that you see behind you. And as an industry, I think we did that. A lot of the innovative companies did that when really real-world evidence and market access became such a challenge. We invested a lot into that, and we jumped that curve. We jumped that first green curve to the second curve and got into an upswing. That is really, if I talk for Janssen, that got us out of that difficult period. We saw the potential of real-world evidence, we saw the potential of market access, and we jumped that curve, and we were already on a decline phase and took that second curve. Now we're actually on a different location here. And this is where technology and digital are really making their inroads into our industry. And again, we might still be on that upslope of that green curve, but let's make not a mistake. That curve is going to taper off. If you don't make the jump to the next curve, we're going to be in trouble. And that space between the two green curves, that's called myopia. That's lack of foresight about not understanding what is going to happen in our industry. So we better be awake and make that jump to the next curve, or otherwise we're going to be disrupted. Disruption rarely happens from within. At Janssen, we know very much what our competitors like Roche and Novartis and others are up to. But what the tech companies are up to, coming into, that's a lot harder. So we really have to phase into that reality. And it's not a bad thing. You just have to phase into the fact that this comes and changes the game that we're in. So the question is, what's next? We talked about change in the past few days here. Change is unprecedented. There's a lot of change going on in every aspect of the world, embodied and fueled by change agents, and the same holds true for our industry. But you could see it as a challenge. I'd like to see it as an opportunity. And, you know, we were, as a pharmaceutical industry, we were for a long time a digital-proof industry. And why was that? You know, we're a highly regulated industry, so the barrier of entry is very difficult. Data was fragmented. The data was not sitting all with us. It sits with different stakeholders. The data is also limited through privacy reasons, and they were not talking to one another. That's another reason. And maybe another one is, just like Tupperware, as a pharmaceutical company, we lived on daily face-to-face contacts, thousands of contacts through our medical reps and medical science liaisons. All of these barriers are being taken away one after the next. And now, just like any other industry, whether it's the travel industry, media, entertainment, we're going to be subjected to technological and digital transformation. In the meantime, AI is going to be democratized, just like we will all drive electrical vehicles in 10 years' time. Every company in 10 years' time will be an AI-fueled company. You just heard about genetics. I mean, the potential of genetics is incredible. Cell therapy, gene therapy. I mean, the future of healthcare is fantastic. We just have to make sure we earn our place into that. And the future is basically here. I guess all of you might have heard already about the CAR-T, let's say, treatments, which basically will transform our market into that ultra customized market of one, where every and each patient is going to be treated individually based on his or her own characteristics. So for me, it's really about connecting the dots. That's why I'm optimistic. That's why I'm really seeing this as an opportunity. And you know, last year when I stood here and it was also referred, and I saw it in the poll this morning about when Amazon said they were going to team up with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway and really take care of the healthcare insurance and treatment for their 1.2 million employees. Stocks of many of the managed health companies in the States went down. Front page news across the world. Very big impact. And whenever Amazon comes into something, you have to take them seriously. Jeff Bezos says about the pharmaceutical industry, your margins are my opportunity. So again, if somebody like Jeff Bezos puts his eyes on things like that, we have to really pay attention. But yet, and this did not make the front page news, on April 16th of 2018, on the 4th page of the newspaper, it says that Amazon shelves its plan to sell drugs to hospitals. And there were a few important reasons cited. They underestimated the complexity of the hospital systems, but they also underestimated the changing needs of physicians, and they could not cope with the rapid progression of science going on. And so that tends me to believe that the future is for us as a pharmaceutical industry and the technological companies to work together. And I think that's absolutely where the future needs to go, and I'll show you that later as well. Now, it starts with having the right mindset. For those in the room who think that staying in the current business model is the safest thing to do, I have to tell you, it's probably the riskiest thing you could do. You have to really ask yourself, how actually am I going to deal with what goes on here? And really, your comfort zone is not where you need to be because the magic happens somewhere else. So, what does the business model for the future look like? And you know what? I might not have the right answer. There's a few things that I come to mind when I'm being asked about that. And you've heard that in the past 3 days here as well, when we talk about, and actually I should start from the other side, interception. So we start moving earlier in the treatment, where at the point we can intercept the disease before it actually manifests in symptoms. We eventually want to move to prevention. We're working at Janssen on an HIV vaccine. It would be fantastic if you get that to the market. And in the end, it would even become to predictive medicines, where we can really start predicting before any symptom or any occurrence of disease has occurred. So that could be a model where we go to the future. Now, why do I call it back to the future? In the 16th century, if you look at traditional China, Chinese doctors were actually paid when they kept their village healthy. So they would get a certain dotation, and if they kept their villagers healthy, they would get that amount of money. Whenever they lost somebody because of disease and death, they would get less money. So physicians were being paid on the number of villagers they could keep healthy. And you know, that's an interesting concept. That's really the concept that I think we should be striving for as well. So how do we get to that model that China had in the 16th century? And there's different theories. This is my own thinking around this. Should we have our own version of the circular economy? And you know what the circular economy is? You don't own the product itself anymore, but you use it as a service. And I think Spotify, Netflix, and Amazon are very clear. You don't own the music, you don't own the movies, you don't own the space where you actually store your data on, but you pay a flat fee and you get it as a service. Philips starts doing the same thing. Rather than selling light bulbs, they actually start selling light now. And as a company, you can make a contract with Philips to say, like, I want all the lights in the room on for the whole year, and I'll pay you a flat fee. And if there's a light bulb that's broken, Philips replaces it for no extra cost because you pay for the light, not for the light bulbs. And so the question is that a model that could work for the pharmaceutical industry as well? Just like the software industry, where you actually make your product for a flat fee available for a predefined amount of time, and people just use that product or that as a kind of a service. Is that a model? Because one thing is for sure, the price per pill, the price per milligram of active ingredient, that model is not going to fly anymore. It doesn't work for the other stakeholders, and it certainly doesn't work for us anymore. So that's one way, our version of the circular economy. The other model that could be, and let me first show you what the traditional model of today looks like, is you do a huge R&D investment. That's the block on the left, the gray block. And then you actually bring your product to the market and you charge a certain price, which you agree with the payer, whoever the payer is. And then you add another indication. I already mentioned that. And you actually have to take a price decrease because you say, well, now there's a larger patient population. I cannot afford that in my budget, so you'll have to take your price down with every new indication, which is a little bit strange because the better your medicine gets, the lower the price you're going to be able to charge for it. And then a new competitor comes in, and we have mechanisms in many countries that will actually take your price down, or there's a government action where unilaterally price is being taken down. And eventually you lose your exclusivity, and that's where your price ends. So the only way is down. Now the question is, why should we stick to that model? Should we not, with everything that we know and that we have access for today, should we not rethink that model and actually go to indication-based pricing? But not just indication-based pricing, of course, based on an outcomes-based model, pre-agreed with whoever the payer is, and say, look, we work from the same acceptance of what outcomes for this medicine could bring, and you determine your price like that. And the more patients come on it, the longer patients stay on a medication, the price actually takes a declining scale. So you launch your product, and as more patients get on there, on a pre-agreed scale, you actually take your price down in the first indication. Now with biotech products, you can have multiple indications. And so a second indication comes, again, you agree on an outcomes-based model with whoever the other stakeholders that you're at the table with, you agree on a price, and as long as the patients stay on it, you actually have a pre-agreed declining scale for your price. Same thing with a third indication. Now you might ask yourself, is that actually going to work? Because in the end, your price is actually going down as well. There's two reasons why I believe this actually could work. The first reason is our R&D cost is going to go down thanks to technology. We heard that before. Let's say the applications of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, machine and deep learning. You can think about synthetic control arms in clinical trials. They are going to make our R&D processes more efficient, faster, and less expensive than they used to be. We have to make sure that regulators buy into that, but I think that is just a matter of time. So R&D cost can actually go down. The other thing is, if you actually have a pre-agreed outcomes-based model per indication, you're going to be able to launch your product much faster. You know, we have medicines at Janssen now, breakthrough medicines, labeled breakthrough medicines in the US, where it took us 700 days to get it reimbursed in France. And in some countries, we still don't have it reimbursed because exactly of the fact that, well, there's uncertainty about how many patients are actually going to be on there. Can you imagine that the 700 days that you win back by having a pre-agreed outcomes-based model with payers where you say, we'll take a declining scale as long as patients stay longer and more on the medicine? You know, the 700 days you win are not the first 700 days. They are the last ones when your medicine is actually at its peak performance. So that could actually get us there. Now, these are just two variations. There might be others. One thing is for sure, price per pill, price per milligram, that model is not going to be sustained or accepted anymore. So the question is, how do we get there? And that's the tricky part. And here's my idea in a kind of an analogy of a solution. This is the G7 suspended 4 chords for the guitarists in the audience. And there should be a sound coming. Now for the non-millennials in the room, who knows what's going to follow next? There you go. This is the song I'm talking about. And you would think, what does a Beatles chord have to do with where healthcare is going to go? And here's the analogy that I want to make. I mean, first of all, I think you need to know I'm a big Beatles fan, but that aside, you know, when that song came out, or when actually the Beatles in 1964 were going to make their first musical movie called A Hard Day's Night, their legendary producer, George Martin, said, you know, musical films actually have a bad reputation. They're usually used as a vehicle to promote the career of the artist, and those movies were for Elvis Presley and Cliff Richard. If you want to make a piece of art that stands on its own, you actually have to make sure you have something to captivate the audience with from the first side of the movie onwards. And so the Beatles came up with that beguiling opening chord of A Hard Day's Night. And it sounds like a G7 suspended 4 chord on a single guitar. But people started listening to that and said, no, it's actually not a single guitar. It's actually something more complicated. And for 5 decades, and there's a lot of studies being published, people tried to figure out, well, how did actually that sound come about? Because it's not a single guitar. And the thing is, and in 2012, the son of that producer, George Martin, actually revealed it, and he said, no, it's actually 4 different instruments playing a specific chord, and that sounds like that G7 suspended 4 chord. And it's been named a magical mystery chord because nobody ever could figure out exactly how that sound came about. But here's the analogy I want to make. If we want to go, and I think the solutions are clear, outcomes-based medicine, value-based healthcare, working together between farm companies and tech companies, that's where the future is going. And the opportunities are unparalleled. But how to make it happen is to make sure that we create alignment with all of the stakeholders. We cannot, not a single party can do this alone. And so the thing is, we in healthcare have to find our magical mystery chord as well in working together between payers, patients, pharmaceutical industry, governments, you name it. If we do not come together, anything we have as a solution will be actually set for failure. And that's a harder thing to do. I mean, as a pharmaceutical industry, we have a reputation going against us, so often we're not invited at the table. But the only way we're going to fix this issue, and like I said, I think the path is clear, is by working together and by striking or finding that magical mystery chord that we in healthcare also have to find. And we can sure as hell not wait 5 decades for it. We actually have to find it soon because patients are waiting. And that's my talk. So thank you very much for listening to me and enjoy the rest of your day.